Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, June 17th, or at least that's what we're pretending it is. Tuesday, June 17th, 2025. It is definitely time for another show, whether, it is right now time for another show or not. By the time you hear this, it will be time for another show. And we've got one for you, and it's all new, as usual. Well, at least this time. This vacation, I was able to make it work. And here's what we got for you. Let's see. I will be following up on our compilation of rotten stinkers from the GOP, the GOP, as we like to call them. This one more or less at random, but a guy who's left a real trail of destruction wherever he's gone. And now it turns out, well, wouldn't you know it? He's got some weirdo connections to Russia. And it just so happens he had been left in charge of taking care of countering disinformation from Russia by shutting down the operation that actually was supposed to counter that information, that disinformation from Russia. And we'll catch you up on what he's been up to. Also, some more information that will supplement our guesses as to what DOGE and the DOGE boys were actually doing, meddling in all the data of the various departments where they broke in and stole all that data. And, various other subjects of interest to get you through this Tuesday and on towards our return coming up just in 2 days from now on Thursday. So, having forgotten what it sounds like when you just open up, and which of these stories I opened up with will say, I'll now intentionally go to the following pre-recorded story, and you will begin to listen to that story. That's my role and yours. Enjoy. Another story I've been holding on to for quite some time, and now I have something to pair it with. We'll see if I can get time to actually pair the two of them together or not. But from NPR, on All Things Considered, Jenna McLaughlin wrote this up, and I guess is it a transcript of that entry on the program? A whistleblower's disclosure details how DOGE may have taken sensitive labor data. We've all been talking for a long time about how it has come to look like what DOGE was chiefly after when they were poking around in all the computer systems, in addition to the ability to turn off payments when Congress wouldn't, or the president maybe couldn't. They would take care of it, but also stealing all the data. And although I only have the vaguest idea of exactly how and why you turn it into value, it has long been said that the tech industry was chiefly running on data in the first place, and that having it, being able to parse it, being able to provide it to others for a fee, being able to use it to optimize the workflow and of transactions, that is, not your own workflow, but making sales to people or finding ways to extract money from them with this data. That much I think I can grasp. Anyway, here is the first of two stories which I think might do well side by side, though they are from a few weeks apart. In the first days of March, a team of advisors from President Trump's new Department of Government Efficiency, which isn't a department, the new DOGE initiative, arrived at the Southeast Washington, D.C. headquarters of the National Labor Relations Board. The small independent federal agency investigates and adjudicates complaints about unfair labor practices. It stores reams of potentially sensitive data, from confidential information about employees who want to form unions to proprietary business information. The DOGE employees, who are effectively led by White House advisor and billionaire tech CEO Elon Musk, not the other lady, appear to have their sights set on accessing the NLRB's internal systems. They've said their unit's overall mission is to review agency data for compliance with the new administration's policies and to cut costs and maximize efficiency. But according to an official whistleblower disclosure shared with Congress, and other federal overseers that was obtained by NPR, subsequent interviews with the whistleblower, and records of internal communications, technical staff members were alarmed about what DOGE engineers did when they were granted access, particularly when those staffers noticed a spike in data leaving the agency. It's possible that the data included sensitive information on unions, ongoing legal cases, and corporate secrets. Data that four labor law experts tell NPR should almost never leave the NLRB, and that has nothing to do with making the government more efficient or cutting spending. Meanwhile, according to the disclosure and records of internal communications, members of the DOGE team asked that their activities not be logged on the system for some strange reason, and then appeared to try to cover their tracks behind them, turning off monitoring tools and manually deleting records of their access. Evasive behavior that several cybersecurity experts interviewed by NPR compared to what criminal or state-sponsored hackers might do. The employees grew concerned that the NLRB's confidential data could be exposed, particularly after they started detecting suspicious login attempts from an IP address in Russia. I think we heard this part of the story, according to the disclosure. Eventually, the disclosure continued, the IT department launched a formal review of what it deemed a serious ongoing security breach or potentially illegal removal of personally identifiable information. The whistleblower believes that the suspicious activity warrants further investigation by agencies with more resources, like the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency or the FBI. Only who knows whether they still exist. The FBI does, but who knows whether they'll actually do anything. Actually, you and I all know they won't. The labor law experts interviewed by NPR fear that if the data gets out, it could be abused, including by private companies with cases before the agency that might get insights into damaging testimony, union leadership, legal strategies, and internal data on competitors, Musk's SpaceX among them. It could also intimidate whistleblowers who might speak up about unfair labor practices, and it could sow distrust in the NLRB's independence, they said. The new revelations about DOGE's activities at the labor agency come from a whistleblower in the IT department of the NLRB who disclosed his concerns to Congress and the U.S. Office of Special Counsel in a detailed report that was then provided to NPR. Meanwhile, his attempts to raise concerns internally within the NLRB preceded someone, quote, physically taping a threatening note to his door that included sensitive personal information and overhead photos of him walking his dog that appeared to be taken with a drone, according to a cover letter attached to his disclosure filed by his attorney, Andrew Bakaj, or I don't know how he pronounces it, Bakaj, of the nonprofit Whistleblower Aid. The whistleblower's account is corroborated by internal documentation and was reviewed by 11 technical experts across other government agencies and the private sector. In total, NPR spoke to over 30 sources across the government, the private sector, the labor movement, cybersecurity, and law enforcement who spoke to their own concerns about how DOGE and the Trump administration might be handling sensitive data and the implications for its exposure. Much of the following account comes from the whistleblower's official disclosure and interviews with NPR. And I do believe we have read this story from another angle in the past, but this serves as a good reminder and still, again, pairs well with this other story. And let's see if there's some new information in this one. I can't attest to what their end goal was or what they're doing with the data, said this whistleblower, Daniel Berulis, in an interview with NPR, but I can tell you that the bits of the puzzle that I can quantify are scary. This is a very bad picture we're looking at. The whistleblower's story sheds further light on how DOGE is operating inside federal systems and comes on the heels of testimony in more than a dozen court cases across the United States that reveal how DOGE rapidly gained access to private financial and personal information on hundreds of millions of Americans. It's unclear how or whether DOGE is protecting the privacy of that data. Meanwhile, the threatening note though its origins are unknown, is reflective of the current climate of fear and intimidation toward whistleblowers. Tim Berizi, again, my best guess at the pronunciation, the NLRB's acting press secretary. Oh my, we've missed out on an opportunity. Oh, see, the long days of doing all this recording. There we are. The acting, yes, acting. What were they acting about? The acting. Oh my gosh, I lost my place. Right. Tim Berizi, the NLRB's, there we are, acting press secretary, denied that the agency granted DOGE access to its systems and said DOGE had not requested access to the agency's systems. Oh, that's real interesting. Berizi said the agency conducted an investigation after Berulis raised his concerns, but determined that no breach of agency systems occurred. Actually, that's a lot less helpful than I thought it was going to be. Notwithstanding the NLRB's denial, the whistleblower's disclosure to Congress and other federal overseers include forensic data and records of conversations with colleagues that provide evidence of DOGE's access and activities. Meanwhile, NPR's extensive reporting makes clear that DOGE's access to data is a widespread concern. Across the government, 11 sources directly familiar with internal operations in federal agencies and in Congress told NPR that they share Berulis' concerns, and some have seen other evidence that DOGE is exfiltrating sensitive data for unknown reasons. After this story published, White House spokesperson Anna Kelly said in a statement, "It is months-old news that President Trump signed an executive order to hire DOGE employees at agencies and coordinate data sharing. Their highly qualified team has been extremely public and transparent in its efforts to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse across the executive branch, including the NLRB," which means nothing. Next up here, this next section, taking apart computers to protect government data. Oh, taking apart computers to protecting government data. Is that the range of things that they were doing? Instead of a brand new car for his 16th birthday present, Berulis got his first computer. Well, that's nice. It's a familiar story for tech nerds the world over. He methodically took the machine apart, quote, to figure out how it works. Just like he had dissected radios from the thrift store years earlier. "I electrocuted myself once," he recalled. Berulis was always interested in public service, but the traditional paths didn't suit him. A knee injury prevented him from joining the military. He served as a volunteer firefighter for a period and donated his time working for a local rape crisis hotline, answering calls from victims in need of someone to listen. But he told NPR, "I had an interest in serving my country." Berulis had been a technical consultant for many years, including in auditing and modernizing corporate systems, when a job opened up at the National Labor Relations Board. While he didn't know much about the agency, Berulis quickly found its mission to protect employees' rights in line with his longstanding desire to help people. He started about 6 months before President Trump was inaugurated for his second term this past January. Berulis said he hit the ground running, securing the NLRB's cloud-based data servers and reinforcing what's called zero trust principles, which means that users can get access only to the parts of the system they need in order to do their jobs. No more, no less. And that way, if an attacker gets a hold of a single username or password, the attacker can't access the whole system. "When I first started, it was a dream come true," he said. "There was a great opportunity to build up and do some good. But after the inauguration," he described a culture of fear descending over the agency. Then next up, DOGE arrives. And now the more I'm reading this and the more I'm seeing the pictures, the more I'm thinking maybe the first time we tried to, that I recall reading this story from a different angle, it may have been this angle. We may have made an attempt to get, sometimes when I make an attempt to get all the way through something and I think that there's some worthwhile material still at the end uncovered, I won't archive the story, thinking that one day, like today, I'll get back to refreshing everybody's memory about the beginning of the story and then completing it. Maybe that's what we're doing. Some of you with better memories may know the answer to that. And you can consider this part a rerun, but the rest of it and the commentary along with it, New material. DOGE arrives in the next section. The first week of March, engineers associated with DOGE arrived at the NLRB's headquarters, according to Baroulis' disclosure. Beforehand, they had asked about what software, hardware, programming languages, and applications the NLRB was using. DOGE learned that it used commercially available cloud infrastructure that businesses typically use, which connects to government cloud systems at other agencies and can be accessed remotely. Baroulis said he and several colleagues saw a black SUV and police escort enter the garage, after which building security let the DOGE staffers in. They interacted with a small number of staffers, never introducing themselves to most of the IT team. Baroulis says he was told by colleagues that DOGE employees demanded the highest level of access, what are called tenant-owner level accounts inside the independent agency's computer systems, with essentially unrestricted permission to read, copy, and alter data, according to Baroulis' disclosure. When an IT staffer suggested a streamlined process to activate those accounts in a way that would let their activities be tracked in accordance with NLRB security policies, the IT staffers were told to stay out of DOGE's way, the disclosure continues. For cybersecurity professionals, a failure to log activity is a cardinal sin and contradicts best practices as recommended by the National Institute of Standards and Technology and the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, as well as the FBI and the National Security Agency. That was a huge red flag, said Baroulis. That's something that you just don't do. It violates every core concept of security and best practice. Those forensic digital records are important for record-keeping requirements, and they allow for troubleshooting. But they also allow experts to investigate potential breaches, sometimes even tracing the attacker's path back to the vulnerability that let them inside a network. The records can also help experts see what data might have been removed. Basic logs would not likely be enough to demonstrate the extent of a bad actor's activities, but it would be a start. There's no reason for any legitimate user to turn off logging or other security tools, cybersecurity experts say. None of this is normal, said Jake Brown, or Braun, not sure. Now that rings a bell too. The executive director of the Cyber Policy Initiative at the University of Chicago's Harris School of Public Policy and former, former acting principal deputy national cyber director at the White House. What a title. And a collection of titles. And he said it all in an interview with NPR about the whistleblower's disclosure. This type of activity is why the government buys insider threat monitoring technology, so we can know things like this are happening and stop sensitive data exfiltration before it happens, he told NPR. However, the NLRB's budget hasn't had the money to pay for tools like that for years, Baroulis said. Next, a backdoor to government systems? ? A couple of days after DOGE arrived, Baroulis saw something else that alarmed him while browsing the internet over the weekend. Massachusetts Institute of Technology graduate and DOGE engineer Jordan Wick had been sharing information about coding projects he was working on to his public account with GitHub, a website that allows developers to create, store, and collaborate on code. After journalist Roger Solenberger started posting on X about the account, Baroulis noted something Wick was working on, a project or repository titled what looks like Next Gen B-Door Extract. Wick made it private before Baroulis could investigate further, he told NPR, but to Baroulis, the title itself was revealing, like Next Generation Backdoor Extract. So, when I saw this tool, I immediately panicked, just for lack of a better term. He said, I kind of had a conniption and said, whoa, whoa, whoa. He immediately alerted his whole team. While NPR was unable to recover the code for that project, the name itself suggests that Wick could have been designing a backdoor, or B-door, to extract files from the NLRB's internal case management system known as NextGen. So he didn't make that up. According to several cybersecurity experts who reviewed Baroulis' conclusions, Wick did not respond to NPR's request for comment. It definitely seems rather odd to name it that, said one of the engineers who built NextGen, and asked for anonymity so as not to jeopardize their ability to work with the government again. Or brazen, if you're not worried about consequences. The whole idea of removing logging and getting tenant-level access is the most disturbing part to me, the engineer said. NextGen is an internal system that was designed specifically for the NLRB in-house, according to several of the engineers who created the tool and who all spoke to NPR on condition of anonymity to avoid retaliation or adverse consequences for any future government work. The engineers explained that while many of the NLRB's records are eventually made public, the NextGen case management system hosts proprietary data from corporate competitors, personal information about union members or employees voting to join a union, and witness testimony in ongoing cases. Access to that data is protected by numerous federal laws, including the Privacy Act. Those engineers were also concerned by DOGE's staffers' insistence that their activities not be logged, allowing them to probe the NLRB's systems and discover information about potential security flaws or vulnerabilities without being detected. If you didn't know the backstory, any chief information security officer worth his salt would look at the network activity like this and assume it's a nation-state attack from China or Russia, said Braun, the former White House cyber official. Next is putting the puzzle pieces together. About a week after arriving, the DOGE engineers had left the NLRB and deleted their accounts, according to Baroulis' disclosure to Congress. In the office, Baroulis had limited visibility into what the DOGE team was up to in real time. That's partly because, he said, the NLRB isn't advanced when it comes to detecting insider threats or potentially malicious actors inside the agency itself. We as an agency have not evolved to account for those, he explained. We were looking for bad actors outside, he said. But he counted on DOGE leaving at least a few traces of its activity behind, puzzle pieces that he could assemble to try to put together a picture of what happened. Details that he did include in his official disclosure. First, at least one DOGE account was created and later deleted for use in the NLRB's cloud systems hosted by Microsoft. And the name of it, I guess here, a list here, DOGE, DOGE SA _ 2D5C3E0446F9 at nlrb.microsoft.com. I don't know if that means anything to you, but not me. Then DOGE engineers installed what's called a container, kind of opaque virtual computer that can run programs on a machine without revealing its activities to the rest of the network. On its own, that wouldn't be suspicious, though it did allow the engineers to work invisibly and left no trace of its activities once it was removed. Then, Baroulis started tracking sensitive data, leaving the places it's meant to live, according to his official disclosure. First, he saw a chunk of data exiting the NextGen case management system's nucleus inside the NLRB system. Baroulis explained, then he saw a large spike in outbound traffic leaving the network itself. It is illustrated with a chart that shows that very spike. From what he could see, the data leaving, almost all text files, added up to around 10 gigabytes, or the equivalent of a full stack of encyclopedias if someone printed them, he explained. It's a sizable chunk of the total data in the NLRB system, though the agency itself hosts over 10 terabytes in historical data. It's unclear which files were copied and removed, or whether they were consolidated and compressed, which could mean even more data was exfiltrated. It's also possible that DOGE ran queries looking for specific files in the NLRB system and took only what it was looking for, according to the disclosure. Regardless, that kind of spike is extremely unusual, Baroulis explained, because data almost never directly leaves from the NLRB databases. In his disclosure, Baroulis shared a screenshot tracking data entering and exiting the system, and there's only one noticeable spike of data going out. He also confirmed that no one at the NLRB had been saving backup files that week or migrating data for any projects. Even when external parties like lawyers or overseers like the Inspector General are granted guest accounts on the system, it's only to view the files relevant to their case or investigation, explained labor law experts who worked with or at the NLRB in interviews with NPR. None of that confidential and deliberative information should ever leave the agency, said Richard Griffin, who was the NLRB General Counsel from 2013 to 2017, in an interview with NPR. Next, we are under assault right now. For cybersecurity experts, that spike in data leaving the system is a key indicator of a breach, Baroulis explained. We are under assault right now, he remembers thinking. I remember hearing that just a minute ago. When Baroulis asked his IT colleagues whether they knew why the data was exfiltrated or whether anyone else had been using containers to run code on the system in recent weeks, no one knew anything about it or the other unusual activities on the network, according to his disclosure. In fact, when they looked into the spike, they found that logs that were used to monitor outbound traffic from the system were absent. Some actions taken on the network, including data exfiltration, had no attribution except to a, quote, deleted account, he continued. Nobody knows who deleted the logs or how they could have gone missing, Baroulis said. The IT team met to discuss insider threats, namely the dodgy engineers, whose activities it had little insight into or control over. We had no idea what they did, he explained. Those conversations are reflected in his official disclosure. They eventually launched a formal breach investigation, according to the disclosure, and prepared a request for assistance from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, as we've called it. However, those efforts were disrupted without an explanation, Baroulis said. That was deeply troubling to Baroulis, who felt he needed help to try to get to the bottom of what happened and determine what new vulnerabilities might be exploited as a result. In the days after Baroulis and his colleagues prepared a request for CISA's help investigating the breach, Baroulis found a printed letter in an envelope taped to his door, which included threatening language, sensitive personal information, and that overhead picture of him walking his dog, according to the cover letter attached to his official disclosure. It's unclear who sent it, but the letter made specific reference to his decision to report the breach. Law enforcement is investigating the letter. If the underlying disclosure wasn't concerning enough, the targeted physical intimidation and surveillance of my client is. If this is happening to Mr. Baroulis, it's likely happening to others and brings our nation more in line with authoritarian regimes than with open and free democracies, wrote Bakaj, or Bakai, perhaps. I don't know how you pronounce it. That's the attorney in his statement sent to NPR. It is time for everyone, and Congress in particular, to acknowledge the facts and stop our democracy, freedom, and liberties from slipping away, something that will take generations to repair. In part because of the stymied internal investigation and the attempts to silence him, Baroulis decided to come forward publicly. In fact, despite all that, Baroulis managed to uncover some stranger and more troubling details about what happened while DOGE was logged on, which he enumerated in his official declaration. Unknown users also gave themselves a high-level access key, what's called a SAS token, meaning shared access signature, to access storage accounts before deleting it. Baroulis said there was no way to track what they did with it. Someone had disabled controls that would prevent insecure or unauthorized mobile devices from logging on to the system without the proper security settings. There was an interface exposed to the public internet, potentially allowing malicious actors access to the NLRB's systems. Internal alerting and monitoring systems were found to be manually turned off. Multi-factor authentication was disabled, and Baroulis noticed that an unknown user had exported a user roster, a file with contact information for outside lawyers who have worked with the NLRB. Baroulis said he noticed 5 PowerShell downloads on the system, a task automation program that would allow engineers to run automated commands. There were several code libraries that got his attention, tools that he said appeared to be designed to automate and mask data exfiltration. There was a tool to generate a seemingly endless number of IP addresses called Requests IP Rotator. and a commonly used automation tool for web developers called Browserless. Both repositories starred or favorited by Wick, the dodgy engineer, according to an archive of his GitHub account reviewed by NPR. While investigating the data taken from the agency, Berulis tried to determine its ultimate destination, but whoever had exfiltrated it had disguised its destination too, according to his disclosure. Dodgy staffers had permission to access the system, but removing data is another matter. Berulis says someone appeared to be doing something called DNS tunneling to prevent the data exfiltration from being detected. He came to that conclusion, outlined in his disclosure, after he saw a traffic spike in DNS requests parallel to the data being exfiltrated, a spike 1,000 times the normal number of requests. When someone uses this kind of technique, they set up a domain name that pings the target system with questions or queries, but they configure the compromised server so that it answers those DNS queries by sending out packets of data, allowing the attacker to steal information that has been broken down into smaller chunks. We've seen Russian threat actors do things like this on U.S. government systems, said one threat intelligence researcher who requested anonymity because they weren't authorized to speak publicly by their employer. That analyst, who has extensive experience hunting nation-state-sponsored hackers, reviewed the whistleblower's technical claims. The difference is they were given the keys to the front door, the researcher continued. While the researcher clarified that it would be difficult to fully verify what happened without full access to the NLRB system, they said Berulis' conclusions and accompanying evidence were a cause for concern. None of this is standard, they said. Russ Handorf, who served in the FBI for a decade in various cybersecurity roles, also reviewed Berulis' extensive technical forensic records and analysis and spoke to NPR about his conclusions. All of this is alarming, he said. If this was a publicly traded company, I would have to report this breach to the Securities and Exchange Commission. The timeline of events demonstrates a lack of respect for the institution and for the sensitivity of the data that was exfiltrated. There is no reason to increase the security risk profile by disabling security controls and exposing them, less guarded, to the internet. They didn't exercise the more prudent standard practice of copying the data to encrypted and local media for escort. Until there's an investigation done, there's no way to definitively prove who did it, Handorf concluded. Next, no reason whatsoever for accessing the information. DOGE's intentions with regard to the NLRB data remain unclear. Many of the systems that DOGE embedded itself in across the rest of the government have payment or employment data, information that it could use to evaluate which grants and programs to halt and whom to fire. But the case management system is very different. It makes me think, I got no particular reason to believe that this is the case, but sometimes I wonder about some of these kids who worked at DOGE, and they may have said, I don't know what's in here, but this is a gold mine of personally identifying information that we could be using for identity theft. And although it has nothing to do with my work, while I'm here, I should just steal this stuff. And later it might come in handy or become valuable, unconnected with what I'm doing here at DOGE. There's always that. Anyway, case management system at the NLRB is very different from the data that they accessed elsewhere. It houses information about ongoing contested labor cases, lists of union activists, internal case notes, personal information from social security numbers to home addresses, proprietary corporate data, and more information that never gets published openly. Experts interviewed by NPR acknowledge that there are inefficiencies across government that warrant further review, but they say they don't see a single legitimate reason that DOGE staffers would need to remove the data from the case management system to resolve those problems. There is no reason whatsoever for accessing the information. Now, could any agency be more efficient, more effective? Positively. But what you need for that is people who understand what the agency does. That is not by mining data, pulling algorithms in, and creating a breach of security, said Harley Shakin, a professor emeritus at the University of California in Berkeley, who specializes in labor and information technology. There is nothing that I can see about what DOGE is doing that follows any of the standard procedures for how you do an audit that has integrity and that's meaningful and will actually produce results that serve the normal auditing function, which is to look for fraud, waste, and abuse, said Sharon Block, the executive director of Harvard Law School's Center for Labor and a Just Economy and former NLRB board member. The mismatch between what they're doing and the established professional way to do what they say they're doing, that just kind of gives away the store, that they are not actually about finding more efficient ways for the government to operate, Block said. For labor law experts, the mere possibility that sensitive records were copied is a serious danger that could create a chilling effect for employees everywhere who turn to the National Labor Relations Board for protection. Just saying that they have access to the data is intimidating, said Kate Bronfenbrenner, the director of labor education research at Cornell University and co-director of the Worker Empowerment Research Network. People are going to go, I'm not going to testify before the board because, my employer might get access. Bronfenbrenner, the child of immigrant parents who fled the Soviet Union and Nazi-controlled Germany, said she spends a lot of time thinking about how systems can crumble under the right circumstances. There's this belief that we have these checks and balances, but anyone who's part of the labor movement should know that's not true, she told NPR. With access to data, it would make it easier for companies to fire employees for union organizing or keep blacklists of organizers, illegal activities under federal labor law enforced by the NLRB. But people get fired in this country all the time for the lawful act of trying to organize a union, said Block. Having a copy of the opposing counsel's notes as companies prepare for legal challenges would also be an attractive possibility, she continued. It's not just employees who might suffer if this data gets out. Companies also sometimes provide detailed statements on internal business planning and corporate structure in the midst of unfair labor practice complaint proceedings. If a company was attempting to fire someone who it alleged had disclosed trade secrets and was fighting an unfair labor practice complaint based around that decision, those trade secrets might come up in the board's investigation too. That information would be valuable to competitors, regulators, and others. Overall, the potential exposure of the NLRB's data could have serious implications. I think it's very concerning, said Shaken. It could result in damage to individual workers, to union organizing campaigns, and to unions themselves, he said. It is bringing a wrecking ball into the dentist office, meaning this is wildly disproportionate and raises real dangers, Shaken continued. Are you extracting teeth with the wrecking ball? I guess. A conflict of interest and the dangers of exposure is next. Labor law experts were particularly concerned about what they described as clear conflicts of interest, particularly when it comes to Elon Musk, his companies, and his vast network of former employees and allies who are now getting access to government jobs and data. Trump and Musk, during an interview with Fox News' Sean Hannity, said Musk would recuse himself from anything involving his companies. I haven't asked the president for anything ever, Musk said. I'm getting a sort of a daily proctology exam here. It's not like I'll be getting away with something in the dead of night, except that's what he was trying to do. However, DOGE has been granted high-level access to a lot of data that could benefit Musk, and there's been no evidence of any firewall preventing misuse of that data. There are multiple ongoing cases involving Musk and the NLRB. For one, after a group of former SpaceX employees lodged a complaint with the NLRB, lawyers representing SpaceX, some of whom were recently hired into government jobs, filed suit against the NLRB. They argued that the agency's structure is unconstitutional. Senator Chris Murphy raised his concerns, about Musk accessing sensitive information or investigation data on cases against his companies or competitors during the confirmation hearing for Trump's labor secretary, Lori Chavez DeRemer, in mid-February. He pressed her to answer whether she believed the NLRB is constitutional and to commit to keeping sensitive data confidential. While she said she was committed to privacy and said she respects the NLRB's authority, she insisted that Trump has the executive power to exercise it as he sees fit. Not quite right, but that's what they all believe. All this is happening in the context of a broader attempt by the White House to hamstring labor agencies. The NLRB was created to guarantee workers' rights and organize and to address problems that workers have in the workplace, said Shakin of UC Berkeley. Under President Joe Biden, he recalled, the labor movement enjoyed an unusual amount of support from Washington. But what we have seen is a sharp slamming of the brakes to that and putting the vehicle in reverse in terms of what Trump has done so far, he continued. In addition to sending DOGE to the NLRB, the Trump administration tried to neutralize the board's power to enforce labor law by removing its member, Gwyn Wilcox. Courts have gone back and forth on whether Wilcox's removal was illegal, as presidents are meant to demonstrate cause for dismissal of independent board members. Representatives of DOGE and former colleagues of Musk's who have been installed across the federal government have failed to reassure the public or the courts that they have taken the proper precautions to protect the data they're ingesting and that private business interests won't influence how that data is used or what policy decisions are made, Block and the other labor law experts interviewed by NPR say. It's not that he's a random person who's getting information that a random person shouldn't have access to, said Harvard Law's Block. But if they really did get everything, then he has information about the cases the government is building against him, she said. DOGE is, whether they admit it or not, headed by somebody who is the subject of active investigations and prosecution of cases. It is incredibly troubling, she said. Musk's company, XAI, could also benefit from sucking up all the data DOGE has collected to train its algorithms. Cybersecurity experts like Bruce Schneier, a well-known cryptographer and adjunct lecturer at the Harvard Kennedy School, have pointed to this concern at length in interviews and written pieces. According to two federal government sources who were not authorized to speak publicly about their workplaces and who shared email documentation with NPR, managers have consistently been warning employees that their data could be subject to AI review, particularly their email responses to the Musk-led campaign to get federal employees to detail what they did last week in 5 bullet points every Monday. I hadn't thought of that aspect of it for those answers. It's not a flight of imagination, rather, to see several DOGE staffers release some of that data surreptitiously to Musk or people close to him, said Shakin. Next up, access for adversaries. If the data isn't properly protected after it leaves the agency, or if DOGE left a digital door open to the agency itself, data could also be exposed to potential sale or theft by criminals or foreign adversaries. An attacker could also try to take advantage of the connections between the NLRB's cloud account and other government cloud environments, using their access to the NLRB as a foothold to move to other networks. Both criminals and foreign adversaries traditionally have used information like this to enrich themselves through a variety of actions, explains Handorf, the former FBI cyber official. That includes blackmail, targeting and prioritizing intellectual property theft for espionage, or even harming a company to enrich another. Within minutes after DOGE accessed the NLRB's system, someone with an IP address in Russia started trying to log in, according to Berulis's disclosure. The attempts were near real time, according to the disclosure. Why so many times they have to keep saying according to the disclosure in this thing? I've spent about half an hour saying according to his disclosure. Those attempts were blocked, but they were especially alarming. Whoever was attempting to log in was using one of the newly created DOGE accounts, and the person had the correct username and password, according to Berulis. While it's possible the user was disguising their location, it's highly unlikely they'd appear to be coming from Russia if they wanted to avoid suspicion, cybersecurity experts interviewed by NPR explained. On their own, a few failed login attempts from a Russian IP address aren't a smoking gun, those cybersecurity experts interviewed by NPR said, but given the overall picture of activity, it's a concerning sign that foreign adversaries may already be searching for ways into government systems that DOGE engineers may have left exposed. When you move fast and break stuff, the opportunity to ride the coattails of authorized access is ridiculously easy to achieve, says Handorf. What he means is that if DOGE engineers left access points to the network open, it would be very easy for spies or criminals to break in and steal data behind DOGE. He said he could also see foreign adversaries trying to recruit or pay DOGE team members for access to sensitive data. It would not surprise me if DOGE is accidentally compromised. This is exactly why we use architect systems using best practices like the principle of least privilege. Ann Lewis, the former director of Technology Transformation Services at the General Services Administration, told NPR in an interview, the principle of least privilege is a fundamental cybersecurity concept that states that users should have only the minimum rights, roles, and permissions required to perform their roles and responsibilities. It was referred to under a different terminology earlier. Same concept, though. This protects access to high-value data and critical assets and helps prevent unauthorized access, accidental damage from user errors, and malicious actions. Bakaj, or Bakai, remember Barulius's lawyer, told NPR in a written statement, this case has been particularly sensitive as it involves the possibility of sophisticated foreign intelligence gaining access to sensitive government systems, which is why we went to the Senate Intelligence Committee directly. Next, a troubling pattern. Boy, this hasn't been a troubling pattern already. The NLRB isn't alone in those concerns. In over a dozen lawsuits in federal courts around the country, judges have demanded that DOGE explain why it needs such expansive access to sensitive data on Americans, from Social Security records to private medical records and tax information. But the Trump administration has been unable to give consistent and clear answers, largely dismissing cybersecurity and privacy concerns. In one case dealing with Treasury Department payment systems that control trillions of dollars in federal spending, U.S. District Judge Jeanette Vargas blocked DOGE access on February 21st, finding a real possibility exists that sensitive information has already been shared outside of the Treasury Department in potential violation of federal law. It's an area of focus for Democratic lawmakers in the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. An aide for the Democratic minority on the House Oversight Committee, who was not authorized to speak publicly, told NPR that the committee is in possession of multiple verifiable reports showing that DOGE has exfiltrated sensitive government information across agencies for unknown purposes, revealing that Barulis' disclosure is not an isolated incident. But government cybersecurity officials are already resigning or being fired, forced to relocate, or put on administrative leave all over the federal government, from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency to the Interior Department. That has limited their power to respond to the ongoing disruptions or keep track of what DOGE is doing. One of the first people to speak out about DOGE's access to sensitive data was Erie Meyer. That's what it says, Erie, E-R-I-E, Meyer, who resigned as the chief technology officer at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau in February. She has provided testimony in ongoing court cases surrounding DOGE's access and also spoke to NPR in an interview. The CFPB has sensitive and potentially market-moving data. Meyer said DOGE employees granted themselves God-tier access to the CFPB's systems, turned off auditing and event logs, and put the cybersecurity experts responsible for insider threat detection on administrative leave. When IT experts at the CFPB planned to conduct an after-action report on DOGE's activities, they were stonewalled, she continued. When she heard about how DOGE engineers operated at the NLRB, particularly the steps they took to obfuscate their activities, she recognized the pattern. I am trembling, she said, upon hearing about the potential exposure of data from the NLRB. They can get every piece of whistleblower testimony, every report, everything. This is not good. Other technical employees working with the government agencies who spoke to NPR shared Barulis' concerns. Our cyber teams are pissed because they have to sit on their hands when every single alarm system we have regarding insider threats is going off, said one employee at an agency of the Interior Department who requested anonymity, fearing retribution. Cybersecurity teams wanted to shut off new users' access to the system, the employee continued, but were ordered to stand down. Meanwhile, in a letter published on March 13th on Federal News Network, 46 former senior officials at the General Services Administration, one of the government agencies hardest hit by DOGE's cost-cutting efforts and that oversees nearly all federal buildings and purchasing, wrote that they believed highly sensitive IT systems are being put at risk and sensitive information is being downloaded to unknown, unvetted external sources in clear violation of privacy and data protection rules. But guess what? The next section says it's just the tip of the iceberg. The Trump administration could be trying to codify DOGE's practices into how the government shares information, said Kel McClanahan, the executive director of nonprofit public interest law firm National Security Counselors, who is representing federal employees in a lawsuit concerning the Office of Personnel Management's use of a private email server. A private email server? Everybody knows what that means. Or maybe none of us knows what it means. None of us knows what it means anymore. It used to mean you can't get anywhere near the presidency, but now it means nothing. But his emails, screw it. Weeks after DOGE staffers descended on federal buildings across Washington, Trump issued an executive order urging increased data sharing by eliminating information silos in what's seen by experts like McClanahan as an attempt to give DOGE engineers further top cover in accessing and amalgamating sensitive federal data, despite laws concerning privacy and cybersecurity. The entire reason we have a Privacy Act is that Congress realized 50 years ago that the federal government was just overflowing with information about normal, everyday people and needed some guardrails in place. McClanahan told NPR, "The information silos are there for a reason," he continued. "It's astonishing to me that the very people who not a handful of years ago were screaming about the government tracking us with vaccines, etc., now cheer for feeding every piece of information about themselves into Elon Musk's stupid Skynet." DOGE appears to still be in the process of visiting federal agencies across the country, including just recently the Securities and Exchange Commission, according to one former government source directly familiar with the matter who requested anonymity to share information they weren't authorized to share. Across the government, it's unclear how much sensitive data has been removed and collected and combined. It's also unclear where the labor data went and who has access to it. But for experts in workers' rights, the threat is immediate and existential. "This shocks the conscience," said Richard Griffin, the former general counsel of the NLRB, "and if DOGE operatives captured and removed case files, it could constitute a violation of the Privacy Act," which only, I guess, worries you if you are interested in law. You know, like the existence of it. For Baroulis, it was important to speak out because he believes people deserve to know how the government's data and computer systems are at risk and to prevent further damage. As a former IT consultant, Baroulis says he would have been fired for operating like DOGE. Disclosing his concerns was a moral imperative at this point. He said, "I've never encountered this in my 20 years of IT." His hope is that there might be further investigations into mishandling of sensitive data across the federal government. "I believe with all my heart that this goes far beyond just case data," he said. "I know there are people at other agencies who have seen similar behavior. I firmly believe that this is happening, maybe even to a greater extent at other agencies." For overseers, investigators, and IT experts in a similar position, he hopes to provide a roadmap of what to look for. "It was my goal by disclosing to Congress not to focus on me at all, but to give them information that they might not necessarily have. The things that you don't necessarily look for unless you know where to look," he continued. The NLRB said it would cooperate with any investigations that stem from Baroulis' disclosure to Congress. As an agency protecting employee rights, the NLRB respects its employees' right to bring whistleblower claims to Congress, and the Office of Special Counsel and the agency looks forward to working with those entities to resolve the complaints, said Beattie, the agency's acting spokesperson, in a statement. Baroulis had a simple request for the DOGE engineers: be transparent. If you have nothing to hide, don't delete logs. Don't be covert. Be open, because that's what efficiency is really about. If this is all a huge misunderstanding, then just prove it. Put it out there. That's all I'm asking. Well, it seems that not everybody agrees on what being transparent means or whether they really mean it when they say it. other stories have borne that out as well, with particular implications for DOGE itself, came right from Musk, right? But ultimately, if the systems that DOGE accesses are left insecure, it might not matter if its intentions are honorable, he concluded. This could just be the start of the operation. They still haven't crossed that boundary where they're plugged into every federal system out there, he continued. So maybe there's still time. And there we have it, having reached the end of this very lengthy NPR piece, which we may very well have started in the past, but you can see how difficult it was to make it all the way through in the confines of a regular show. But guess what? There's more. And I'll have to record that separately. And if I can shoehorn it in right next to this one, fantastic. Otherwise, stay tuned to hear part 2 of this crazy story. All right, so you should consider this part 2 whenever this airs, whether it's immediately following the piece I read you at great length from NPR about the whistleblower who let everyone know, in particular Congress know, that the DOGE engineers were sneaking around inside the computer systems of the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB, and exfiltrating huge amounts of data with no real reason for doing so, and also having obfuscated their tracks, erasing the activity logs, etc., etc. And all we are able to do at this point is guess at what they might have been doing and why they were doing it. But it has always been the guess of people like the whistleblower at the NLRB and elsewhere that this was happening, and perhaps to an even greater extent in other federal agencies. Now we add this story to it from the Daily Beast, published in June 7th, updated the following day. Liam Archaki is the reporter here, Archacki. Again, it's the Daily Beast. Musk's DOGE goons, it's in the headline, surreptitiously transmitted reams of White House data. Now that seems like a real problem, don't you think? Musk's team installed a Starlink Wi-Fi terminal on top of the White House, allowing them to bypass data tracking security measures in the White House. Almost certainly not a terrific idea. Elon Musk's goons at the Department of Government Efficiency transmitted a large amount, whatever that might mean, of data, all of it undetected, using a Starlink Wi-Fi terminal they installed on top of the White House, according to a news report. Starlink, as you may know, is a satellite Wi-Fi service owned and operated by Musk's SpaceX. The DOGE goons installed it in mid-March with the sign-off of Donald Trump's administration, but against concerns raised by security officials, according to the Washington Post. Officials in charge of protecting the White House communications were not informed of the installation ahead of time, insiders told the Post, and I guess I should have been reading the Post story on this, but hopefully the Daily Beast gets to the juicy stuff and hypes it up just a little bit just to keep us interested. The officials in charge of protecting White House communications, as we said, were not informed of the installation ahead of time. At the time, DOGE said installing Starlink was intended to address connection dead zones in the White House compound, although I have always suspected that some of those dead zones are intentional, but nobody cared or nobody knew that. I'm not sure which. Maybe both. However, the insiders suggested that the move was intended to bypass White House systems that track the transmissions of data with names and timestamps and secure it from spies. Wouldn't that be a good idea? Starlink doesn't require anything. It allows you to transmit data without any kind of record or tracking, one insider told the Post. White House IT systems had very strong controls on network access. You had to be on a full tunnel VPN at all times. If you're not on the VPN, White House issued devices can't connect to the outside. With a Starlink connection, that means White House devices could leave the network and go out through gateways, the person said. It's going to help you bypass security. The White House did not immediately return the Daily Beast's request for comment. Anthony Guglielmi, I hope that's right, although do I care? The spokesperson for the Secret Service, I think we've tried his name out before, told the Post, we were aware of DOGE's intentions to improve internet access on the campus and did not consider this matter a security incident or security breach. Wow, what do you know? That's convenient. Before Musk departed the government and blew up his relationship with Trump, he was busy laying siege to sensitive government databases, including the ones that handle Social Security, sparking concerns from critics. In April, a whistleblower at the National Labor Relations Board accused the Musk-led department of a significant cybersecurity breach. Daniel Berulis, an IT staffer, said he saw anomalously, not anonymously, but anomalously large data transfers and sign-in attempts from Russia after DOGE took over his agency's systems. In that case, the DOGE staffers insisted that their actions in the system not be tracked. While Trump and the rest of his administration supported Musk against critics while he sought to slash government jobs and budgets on Trump's behalf, the two have now suffered a nasty mudslinging breakup. Even as the battle between the two billionaires continues, the Post reported that guests to the White House still see a listing for Starlink guest on their phones. Just sort of left it there and left it open. And I'm pretty sure that's a best practice when it comes to cybersecurity. How awesome. And I guess thanks to the Daily Beast and the folks there probably for condensing the Washington Post report to its most necessary nitty-gritty. And at the end of a long day, I appreciate it. So to add to our growing Republican rogues gallery, I had a piece set aside more recently that from, June 3rd that I was going to share with you because of the intriguing headline. Trump official who shut down counter-Russia agency has links to Kremlin. Makes some sense, right? Exactly who you would think would enter the United States government and shut down counter-Russia agencies, whatever they are. His name is Darren Beattie, perhaps like Warren Beatty, except with an I-E at the end instead of a Y, Beattie. Darren Beattie, who alarmed the State Department with his pro-Moscow views, is also, it turns out, married to a woman whose uncle has ties to Vladimir Putin. And I know it's getting a little tenuous here, but when the tie at the end is to Vladimir Putin, I guess you want to take a quick look at it. Benedict Smith is the reporter for the UK Telegraph here. And the thing is, it's a paywalled article. And I thought it would be intriguing. And I thought also that I could read it through Pocket, but only partially, as it turns out. And I'm not exactly sure how much of it is missing, but it was very intriguing what I was scanning in Pocket. Anyway, there was, bits and pieces of who he was married to and what this woman was about. And, let's see. In a post more than 2 years ago, I don't know what point this article sort of jumps in in the middle in the Pocket version, but it does say in a post more than 2 years ago after the outbreak, or 2 years after the outbreak of war in Ukraine, Beattie, criticized the UK's policy of antagonizing Russia. All of those social media posts are still online at the time of writing, although Mr. Beattie has deleted disparaging tweets about Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State, having previously claimed his now boss attended gay foam parties. Don't know, but clearly the gay thing is supposed to jump out as an attack there. According to Miss what's the name we're talking about here? Kirilova. Ms. Kirilova, I guess, is the woman to whom he is connected and who has the links to the Kremlin. But according to her Facebook page, she moved to Washington on January 28th, roughly a week before her, I guess now, husband began his role at the State Department. So, what is this guy's role at the State Department? I don't know, but I do know this. One, there's still a balance to this article, which looks intriguing enough, although it is odd to do it without the introduction. And two, when I went looking back even further in Pocket, I found another entry, this one by Nina Jankowicz, whose name I believe we've called once or twice in the past. But as it turns out, having looked at there's an actual pronunciation guide for her name. One, the emphasis is on that middle syllable, and two, instead of not Jankowicz, but Yank, right? So, but Yankovic. Yankovic is how it would be pronounced in Polish. She has said in her pronunciation guide. I didn't say, oh yeah, I know my Polish pronunciation. Just that's the case. But it goes towards explaining the name of her Substack blog, which is her name being Yankowicz. It's Wikipedia. Get it? Wikipedia. Okay. So that goes by way of explaining. Plus, it's a pronunciation guide. And it turns out that this piece that I had put aside when I saw it first in early May 5th is the publication date, is about Beattie. And I did not know that, or at least in part about Beattie. The extremist at the State Department, and I think it's him that we're talking about, is doing exactly what we thought he would, she says, explaining the latest Trump administration enemies list. Yes, there's another one. So I'm wondering whether it pays to run through the pocket visible version of the UK's Telegraph article about him first and then getting more detailed information. Why don't we try it that way? So let's see, where we left off, he's married to this Miss Kirillova, or Kirillova, perhaps. I don't know where that emphasis belongs. And they're now married. And despite his wide-ranging brief at the heart of the U.S. government, Mr. Beattie is said to have focused a disproportionate amount of time on seeking to dismantle the Counter Foreign Information Manipulation and Interference Hub, known as, well, R/FIMI, F-I-M-I, Foreign Information Manipulation and Interference, while building cultural ties with Russia. Does the R mean it's a Reddit, a subreddit of some kind? I don't know. Well, this next section is titled Censorship Network, and this R/FIMI, which tracked and countered propaganda from sources including Russia, China, and Iran, was a relatively small agency, an actual agency, with a budget of just over $50 million at the time it was shut down. The U.S.'s adversaries perhaps, if you're reading it in the UK voice, I don't know, are estimated to spend tens of billions of dollars a year on foreign disinformation. Mr. Beattie's news outlet Revolver had spent years attacking R/FIMI, accusing it of being part of a censorship network designed to silence conservative voices. Ah, I see. Sources said Mr. Beattie had doggedly pursued the agency after being appointed, taking it apart piece by piece. Contractors were sacked, and officials were ordered to stop communicating with others in the State Department or external partners without explicit permission. Even before it was disbanded in mid-April, when Mr. Beattie told staff in a brief speech that it was severely misaligned with the administration's priorities, i.e. helping Russia, I guess, its work had essentially wrapped up. Mr. Rubio confirmed in an interview distributed by the State Department the same day that Mr. Beattie had played a major role in abolishing R/FIMI. At the same time, as Mr. Beattie was working on dismantling the agency, he is said to have pushed to rebuild relations with Russia, insisting on instituting cultural exchange programs in fields such as ballet and hockey. He is said to have taken a significant interest in classified material related to Russia, oddly enough, prompting widespread concern about turning over sensitive information to him. Oh no. He's got, probably top secret clearance, and he can take what he wants, and golly, if he isn't transferring it to Russia, I don't know what he's doing with it. Sources were highly skeptical if it had undergone a security vetting process, which the State Department's website notes can take anywhere from a couple of months to over a year to complete. Beattie limited, it says here, to 210 days in post. What's that? On his first day in office, Mr. Trump unilaterally granted top-secret security clearances to personnel in the executive office of the president, citing a backlog in processing. Day one. The office is not a part of the State Department. MIT Technology Review reported this month that Mr. Beattie had launched a sweeping effort to obtain records from R/FIMI staff shortly before it closed, apparently with the intention of characterizing it as an organization dedicated to smearing conservatives for parroting Russian propaganda, I guess. He asked for communications with or about reporters who write about foreign disinformation, along with references to Mr. Trump and his allies. One official said the move amounted to a witch hunt. Oh, no. Mr. Beattie would need confirmation by the Senate to take on the undersecretary role full time, but, as you know, he can exercise many of the same powers as an acting official, but as an acting official, he is limited to 210 days. Allies in the media have suggested he is unlikely to survive his time in the spotlight and have suggested permanent posts where he could be installed without requiring backing from senators. A senior State Department official said, "No one in America cares about a British gossip column. This is all fake news and low even for tabloid standards. Darren is a tremendous colleague," tremendous something anyway, "who is committed to advancing President Trump's America First agenda. In a few short months, he has been able to spearhead high-level projects that have been critical in advancing a foreign policy that puts our nation's interests first," or maybe Russia's. Mr. Chernikov, I don't know when he got introduced in this thing, and Ms. Kirilova have been approached for comment. That's an interesting way of putting it over in the UK. Mr. Beattie described the allegations as malicious, defamatory trash that is beneath the standards of even the British tabloid press. So that's the snippet I get from the Telegraph. And now I can switch over to Wikipedia, Nina Yankowicz's rendition of this. And she's one of the people targeted here by Beattie, from what I can gather. This week, and that was back on May 5th, the MIT Technology Review, previously cited, reported that the State Department is in the middle of a, quote, sweeping effort to uncover all communications between the staff of a small government office focused on online disinformation and a lengthy list of public and private figures, many of whom are longtime targets of the political right. And you should get dramatic, I feel, for that one. The department's intention is to release these communications to the public in a Twitter Files-style document dump so that you know it will have been well vetted and well thought through, right? Like the so-called Twitter Files, this effort will be another charade that is high on fantasy and low on facts. It will paint the Trump administration and the hand-selected, quote, journalists who will, quote, report on the documents as heroes. It will upend the lives of many of the list's targets, especially those who have not been smeared by the right-wing lie machine before. It will conveniently enrich those who cover its salacious lies with sweet, sweet subscription dollars and distract the public from the very real assaults on the First Amendment Trump 2.0 is undertaking. I'm, Nina says, one of the 39 individuals on the list. It seems the Trump folks, like the Nazis, Soviets, and Nixon administration, love making them. Enemies list, that is. I'm on Kash Patel's enemies list, and one created by a crazy extremist with ties to Michael Flynn, too. I have been the folk villain in the elaborate tale of alleged right-wing censorship for the past 3 years, all because I have researched disinformation for the past decade and took a job in the Biden administration in my area of expertise. My work in and out of government was widely lied about. I've been around for every extremely dumb twist and turn of the censorship, quote-unquote censorship, conspiracy theories. If you're just joining, welcome. And I feel like we are, although we have some background in these accusations against disinformation researchers before. The release of these internal communications is an unprecedented abuse of access to federal records, overseen by a white supremacist, misogynist conspiracy theorist whose personal animus motivates him to lie about those who have previously exposed his nonsense. His lies have the potential to bring serious personal, professional, and security consequences for those targeted, and they are leaving our nation more exposed to foreign interference than ever. But we have the power to stop them in their tracks. We know the playbook they're about to follow. I've laid it out below, so when you see it in the wild, or when crazy Uncle Larry starts quoting it at your Memorial Day barbecue, you can push back. You've missed your chance to do it at the Memorial Day barbecue, but it can still happen at July 4th. To make sure more people see this, well, then instructions for boosting the reach of her newsletter, which you can't argue with, right? Hit the heart above, like it and share it with everyone who cares about the truth. Now let's get to work. First, behind the records request. On March 11th, the acting Undersecretary, come on everybody, Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy, Darren Beattie, whose job is repairing America's tattered image, not engaging in domestic political warfare, issued a memo requesting a wide swath of records from an office that had worked to counter foreign disinformation and propaganda. From 2017 to late 2024, that office was known as the Global Engagement Center, or GEC. Late last year, under pressure from Republicans, funding for the GEC was slashed, and the office was closed. Some of the GEC's staff were reassigned to a new office in states, that is the State Department's, public diplomacy, known in departmental parlance as R Bureau. Okay, because I've seen people refer to like subreddits with that r/. But so I guess FEMI is part of the R Bureau, public diplomacy. Okay, well that makes much more sense than it being a Reddit hub. But, and then I was beginning to imagine how could they make that have worked. Well, maybe when they closed down the GEC, they put all their archives on there because they were at least publicly, ones that they could reveal publicly that were non-classified, something like that. But don't worry about it because that's not what actually happened. So R in the State Department stands for the Public Diplomacy Bureau. Why R? I don't know. Why M? Why Q? Right? I mean, I guess there's that. So, where were we here? Some of the GEC staff were reassigned to this R Bureau in the Office of Foreign Information Manipulation and Interference, FEMI. So now R FEMI. Maybe we'll just stick with FEMI here. I think that's the way she does it. The R/ thing seems like a weird appendage. That office also became the target of conservative ire and was the topic of the April congressional hearing in which I testified. Oh, okay. I don't know if we took note of that one, but it was clearly of some import. MAGA conspiracy grifters allege that the GEC, along with a whole host of other government agencies, has been in cahoots with academic and professional researchers to, quote, censor conservatives. It would indeed be a bad thing if the government did coerce platforms to remove American speech, but it didn't. More on that later. Enter Beattie's document request. Here we go. Acting Undersecretary had instructed State's Department of Administration, which handles, among other things, Freedom of Information Act requests that usually come from outside the government, to provide to him a bulleted list, including a list of all grants, subgrants, and cooperative agreements and their respective implementers that the GEC was involved with since 2017. All documents and correspondence that references a list of 16 media and civil society organizations. All documents and correspondence between or referencing a list of 39 individuals, including yours truly. And all communications and documents that reference a long list of right-wing politicians and influencers, including Beattie himself, and right-wing buzzwords, including incels, color revolution, and Pepe the Frog. Of course, only the most serious investigations. What will the State Department do with the records? According to Eileen Guo's report for the MIT Technology Review, Beattie, quote, told State Department officials that his goal in seeking the records was a Twitter files-like release of internal State Department documents to rebuild trust with the American public. According to a State Department employee who heard the remarks, if you missed the Twitter files or simply stopped paying attention because it failed to deliver on its promise to expose the made-up, quote, censorship industrial complex, you're not alone. Here's how the Twitter files playbook works in bulleted format. First, conspiracy theorist gets access to internal records of a large embattled organization. conspiracy theorists and handpicked, quote, journalists use access to selectively identify records that they claim, quote, prove their censorship theory. Records are then sliced, diced, and stripped of nuance and context to suggest impropriety or illegality. High follower accounts like Elon Musk, Joe Rogan, and POTUS, as well as the extremist media ecosystem, breathlessly amplify the claims without attempting to contextualize or fact-check them. Then, allegations made through records releases drive investigations, harassment, and threats to those falsely implicated. Round and round we go. Is there any truth to these allegations? At a recent televised cabinet meeting, overflowing with Soviet-style obsequious subservience, Marco Rubio falsely claimed that, quote, we had an office in the Department of State whose job it was to censor Americans. Rubio presented this allegation at the meeting and in multiple pieces of fan fiction released since then as a gotcha moment. But it's not the gotcha Rubio thinks it is. As Ben Schultz, the lead researcher at my nonprofit, the American Sunlight Project, wrote recently, the GEC's mandate was clear. It was created originally to combat ISIS propaganda and recruitment online. Its mission was expanded in the 2017 National Defense Authorization Act, which Rubio voted for, by the way, to include addressing other foreign propaganda, disinformation, or influence operations. Its mandate had been refunded by Congress multiple times on a bipartisan basis thereafter. Even more hypocritical is the fact that an overwhelming amount of the transgressions Rubio claims to be outraged about happened under the watch of Trump appointee and former Fox News commentator Leah Gabrielle, who led the GEC from 2019 to 2021. Facts do not deter modern Republicans, however, especially as it's searching for the smoking gun to finally prove its, quote, censorship theories, which have been excoriated in the Supreme Court and beyond. Rubio, Beattie, and others have falsely claimed that the GEC funded two nonprofits to create conservative, quote, blacklists. What really happened? The GEC, as part of its mission, gave small grants to organizations researching foreign disinformation and its impact on Americans and American foreign policy. Two of these organizations, the Global Disinformation Index and NewsGuard, received small grants to track Chinese Communist Party propaganda. We're supposed to have Republican agreement on that one. They also ranked the reliability and trustworthiness of news websites for consumers and advertisers. Their China work and ranking work were separate projects with separate funding streams, but the MAGA crowd claims that funding for narrowly scoped projects about China awarded during the first Trump administration somehow funded a censorship regime costing their bunk, quote, news outlets millions in ad revenue. In a March 2025 court ruling that deeply undermines the foundational premises of both the GEC claim as well as those of the broader censorship industrial complex narrative, a New York federal judge dismissed a lawsuit alleging that the U.S. government censored them via NewsGuard's reliability rankings. The court laid out that the bar for state censorship would require that the, quote, government-controlled NewsGuard's decision-making process and internal operations for this project, which, as noted above, it absolutely did not. The ruling separately noted that mere commentary on the reliability of content, even if made by a state actor, would be, quote, a far cry from the threat of adverse government action, unquote, in violation of the First Amendment, and would rather be, quote, at most, merely criticizing plaintiffs' beliefs forcefully in the hopes of persuading others, unquote. Rubio's claims of COVID-era censorship are also bunk. In an op-ed in The Federalist announcing the closure of the GEC's successor office, as my colleague Ben writes, the Secretary of State took, quote, particular issue with GEC's warnings in 2020, which, to remind everyone, was when Donald Trump, not Joe Biden, was in office. that hostile foreign actors like Russia were pushing COVID-related disinformation. But even he admits, the GEC never censored any content. It merely sent certain posts to social media companies for review. Social media companies then made their own decisions according to their terms of service. The conservative majority Supreme Court didn't even support these theories. In 2022, censorship truthers led by the attorneys general of Missouri and Louisiana brought a case, Missouri versus Biden, later styled Murphy versus Missouri, against a wide range of Biden administration officials, inclusive of yours truly. I was swiftly removed from the list of defendants, claiming that the Biden administration had coerced social media platforms to censor conservative content online. That case was appealed up to the Supreme Court, and it was dismissed for lack of standing, 6-3, in an opinion that Amy Coney Barrett, hardly a liberal firebrand, authored. The court found no harm done to anyone by the U.S. government when it flagged content to Meta, which violated Meta's terms of service. In fact, the plaintiffs in Murphy couldn't name a single piece of content that had been ordered down by the GEC or any other federal agency invoked in the suit, as Ben writes. So what's the deal with this Darren Beattie guy? Here's a picture of him on Tucker Carlson's Uncensored show. Looking, bedraggled. But Darren Beattie is now the acting Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy. The acting in his title is important. He's serving in a role that would require Senate confirmation. And even in a world where the Republican-led Senate is pretty much rubber stamping every Trump nominee, the Trump administration made Beattie an acting Undersecretary, recognizing they might face an uphill battle confirming him in his candidacy. Why? Even by the nearly non-existent standards of the second Trump administration, Beattie is a profoundly unfit and unqualified person for public service. Some bullet points? Sure, I have some. How about 3? Beattie got fired from his role as a speechwriter in the first Trump administration after he gave a speech at a white supremacist conference. He has openly posted misogynist, racist content, regularly harassed women and black people, and even celebrated the January 6th insurrection. And finally, he founded extremist media outlet Revolver, which served as the distributor for some of his craziest conspiracies, including that Biden's 2020 election win was a, quote, color revolution, a term that has become Putin's dog whistle for alleged U.S. intelligence agency interference when a popular protest movement takes the country in Moscow's orbit farther away from Mother Russia. In Beattie's world, Biden's popular support was an intelligence operation, and January 6th was a false flag. Laura K. Field excoriated Revolver and Beattie at length in The Bulwark for, quote, moving goalposts, perverse inversions, incoherence, the marks of morally and intellectually unserious individuals who either have no integrity or sacrifice it in order to kiss up to the likes of Bannon, Carlson, and Trump. So, who's being targeted and who's being protected? Here from MIT's reporting, we know that Beattie's targets include, more bullets, disinformation researchers and research institutions, myself, Renee DiResta, Clint Watts, Harvard's Berkman Klein Center, and the Stanford Internet Observatory. That one I know about. Commentators, journalists, and journalism organizations like Ann Applebaum, Bill Kristol, Brandy Zadrozny, open source investigative outlet Bellingcat. Heard of most of them. Government entities and former government officials, DHS's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, right? And its Trump-era director, Chris Krebs, former ambassador to Poland, Dan Fried, who has been active in writing and commenting on disinformation since his retirement from the State Department, foreign government officials, Nancy Faeser, maybe Faeser, the German Interior Minister. Okay. Any organization that has ever received a grant from or entered into a cooperative agreement with the Global Engagement Center. Beattie is also looking for a trove of information about his personal friends and other people he wants to, quote, protect from, quote, censorship. His memo includes a long list of right-wing individuals and, quote, independent bloggers who have been involved with the censorship lie, and these include right-wing politicians, Trump and members of his family, Bolsonaro, Imran Khan, Nigel Farage, RFK Jr., Marine Le Pen, the only woman listed who is not a target, actually. Isn't that interesting? Next up, conservative commentators like Steve Bannon, Charlie Kirk, Dan Bongino, Elon Musk, Joe Rogan, Alex Jones, and Tucker Carlson. But this is a great list, huh? Those are who he wants protected. His pals who also promote the censorship lie like Matt Taibbi, Jack Posobiec, Glenn Greenwald, and Mike Benz. And, of course, Beattie himself. Finally, Beattie is seeking material on a list of keywords including QAnon, election denier, vaccine skeptic, BLM, and, importantly, Pepe the Frog. Among them are two of his pet interests, Color Revolution, described above and in a footnote, and Integrity Initiative, the name of an inane conspiracy that claims because a bunch of disinformation researchers and journalists' names appeared in the contact list for a program of a little-known British think tank, that we are all part of some cabal to conduct thought control exercises or something. It's exceedingly dumb and makes my brain melt when I try to explain it. Taken together, the motivation behind the memo is very clear. Weird guys hold weird grudges. The presence on his list of targets, on his target list of women like Brandy Zadrozny, a journalist whose coverage he didn't like, and who he's tweeted about dozens of times in misogynistic and abusive ways, really gives away the game here. Darren Beattie isn't trying to uncover any impropriety. The memo represents the juvenile Twitter beefs of a broken man. Why aren't they looking into social media platforms? Two reasons. First, remember that this isn't a good faith inquiry. Second, even though the right wing spent years complaining about, quote, collusion between the tech platforms and the government, the Trump administration has now captured Silicon Valley. The MAGA movement is not interested in if or whether the social media platforms coordinated with the GEC or anyone else, because the social media platforms are currently doing Trump's bidding. Musk, Zuckerberg, and all the other tech executives have paid for political campaigns, made contributions to Trump events, settled lawsuits, and rolled back content moderation policies as part of this social media protection racket. If the Beattie memo is an indication of the thinking inside the administration, it's working out well for big tech. Why is the Trump administration doing this? Other than Beattie's mission to get payback for all the times that he's been fact-checked and told his views are repugnant, there's a couple of motivations. More bullet points up. Distraction. Oh no, not that one. If the Trump administration is able to create unending news about the false narrative of GEC censorship, this time using never-before-seen documents, they hope the American people, and crucially their supporters, will look away from the full-scale assault on the First Amendment that Trump is currently leading. Also, profit, of course. There's a lot of money to be made pushing shocking conspiracies about government overreach. All of the individuals and organizations involved in making the censorship lie official State Department policy, from Darren Beattie's own Revolver to the Substack blogs from individuals like Matt Taibbi, Michael Schellenberger, to corporate outlets like Fox News, have all cashed in on it because it enriches them. Individuals like Taibbi and Schellenberger may be making 6 figures a month pushing these lies. Damn it. Give me some of that. We wrote about how this cycle, about this cycle and the profit it makes those involved in a report last summer. There's a link here to it. Whether online or on TV, the most engaging content is often the most enraging content. I like that. Rhymes. And the censorship lie delivers on both counts. And then, of course, power. I can't explain Marco Rubio's participation in this charade, or the Zelensky Oval Office meeting, during which he clearly wanted to disappear into the couch, for that matter, or any way other than as a lust for power. Rubio hopes to inherit the Trump empire, perhaps after J.D. Vance is done with it. He can only do that by eating a giant, crap sandwich every day. But, not that. Crap sandwich is not alliterative. Recently, that sandwich had censorship seasoning, and I just censored myself. So there you go. Isn't transparency a good thing? Why is this abnormal and anti-democratic? No one is against transparency, but there are processes that typically enable it and ensure it isn't weaponized for political purposes in massive bureaucracies like the State Department. If Beattie, Rubio, or the Trump administration writ large had concerns about the GEC, they could launch an investigation through the State Department Inspector General. Matt Armstrong, a former governor on the Broadcasting Board of Governors, now the U.S. Agency for Global Media, told me in an email a functioning inspector general could get into these emails, conduct interviews, and report on the issues with statutory authority and gravitas. This is an example of this administration looking backwards, not forwards, embracing Russian disinformation and helping their Russian friends. This also is not a typical Fourth Estate holds government accountable via the Freedom of Information Act exercise, though the Washington Free Beacon's paragon of intellect, Chuck Ross, interpreted it that way, by which journalists request, so it's not one of these FOIA exercises by which journalists request government documents of their own accord and then conduct investigations based on them without a government minder peering over their shoulder. Anyone who accepts documents from Beattie will tacitly understand what the conclusion they must reach is. Or what conclusion, I would have to edit that one, what conclusion they must reach. The State Department effort uncovers massive censorship regime, that's what they're looking for, in order to retain Beattie in the Trump administration's favor and not get yeeted from the press pool or scrambling for administration access. Now begins the search for the evidence. Usually investigations go the other way around. So what happens next? Beattie either handpicks a, quote, journalist or two to run this, quote, investigation, or he'll just dump the documents, likely poorly or minimally redacted, on the State Department's website for the class of influencers that live off the censorship lie to run with as they please. I don't know which one happened. I didn't stay connected to the story, and I'm only sort of learning about it now, a month after it was spilled here. But either way, 1,000 new conspiracy theories will spawn. It doesn't really matter if there's any meaningful evidence in any of the documents. The modern internet mob does not need anything anywhere near a smoking gun. Individuals who have not been targeted before, particularly those who are or were career civil servants or less public-facing researchers, may find themselves doxxed, abused, or threatened. Others may find themselves the target of federal investigations, IRS audits, or other forms of government harassment. Our nation's response to the very real threats we face from foreign disinformation and influence campaigns will be stunted at best. The Trump administration and its online mercenaries will attempt a victory lap, but it's not a foregone conclusion. You know what's coming, and you can engage in robust conversations with those you encounter who are bought into the censorship lie. Yeah, I thought that was an interesting entry and an interesting warning. I'd like to check and see, and maybe through the magic of pre-recording, I can check and see whether there's been any update to this, and either on her own Substack or elsewhere in the news. Then I can take a short break and scroll back. There was definitely something that I said, ooh, I've got another piece on this that I can bring forward. And naturally, there being no writing implement nearby at hand, I didn't get a chance to write it down. Let me go figure out what it was, and maybe I can join it with this larger effort and make a whole episode out of it again, one more time. Well, I'll tell you what. How about if I read you this New Republic article that I found, published on June 3rd, written by Malcolm Ferguson, which appears to mirror the approach that the UK Telegraph was taking, and which I deprived myself of, about his connection, or his wife's connection, Darren Beattie's wife's connections Trump official behind controversial Russia decision has Kremlin ties. Darren Beattie dismantled a key agency fighting Russian propaganda. You know that. There's a reason why. I guess there are several, and one of them has to do with his marriage. Senior State Department staffer Darren Beattie, a passionate Putin supporter somehow, behind the move to dismantle a key agency fighting Russian propaganda, is married to a Russian woman whose uncle is a longtime Kremlin ally, according to The Telegraph. So now we get their interpretation of it. Yulia Kirilova, you tell me how that's pronounced, grew up in Moscow, studied abroad in North America, that's here, and married Beattie in 2021 in Florida. I wonder where exactly. She moved to D.C. in January. Her uncle, Sergei Cherniko, is a drinks magnate, does that mean liquor, he's the biggest lemonade, got the biggest lemonade stand in Moscow? I don't think so. He's known as Putin's thirst quencher. I don't know. Anyway, a drinks magnate who had an estimated net worth of $150 million in 2005. That year, he served in Russia's Ministry of Natural Resources. Maybe the drink was water. And then was deputy governor of Siberia's Nenets region. Cherniko served later in Putin's civic chamber from 2008 to 2010. The relationship raises even greater scrutiny around Beattie's April decision to eliminate the Global Engagement Center, a State Department office tasked with dealing with Russian disinformation campaigns. Beattie has been a staunch supporter of Putin, setting himself apart from the traditional conservative right in Bannon-esque fashion. U.S. government has been supporting Ukrainian neo-Nazi groups in its obsessive proxy war against Russia, he wrote on X in 2022. State Department, ready for this one? Good morning, everybody. State Department could sell butt plugs. Could it, though? And forward proceeds to fund resistance effort in Ukraine, he wrote again that year, very sensibly. Iran-Contra, but with a modern American twist. Yeah. A big part of American ruling class's hatred of Russia is that Russia is a major power that rejects the woke ideology at the core of American regime, he wrote in 2021. So he's a prolific genius. Yes, this is a clear conflict of interest that is extremely typical within the Trump administration. And on top of that, Beattie was initially fired from the Trump administration the first time in 2018 for attending a white nationalist conference. He has a long history of many other deeply problematic views. And this time I want to click on the link and see what conference was it. Let's see if we can get that quickly. Another TNR piece also by Malcolm Ferguson, which explains how he remembered it. Any way to get quickly the name of the organization? Does it ring a bell for us at all? Not so far. Still scrolling, looking for it. I don't know. It isn't named anywhere. What is this? Why is that the case? Yeah, let's see. Well, let me click on yet another link. Trump speechwriter fired amid scrutiny of appearance with white nationalists. This is the actual 2018 article in the Washington Post. And where is it? Let's see. Beattie, who, by the way, at the time was a visiting instructor at Duke University. Wow. Didn't even realize that. When he joined the White House speechwriting team, was fired Friday after a media inquiry about his appearance at the 2016 H.L. Mencken Club conference. Really? Where Beattie spoke on a panel alongside Peter Brimelow. I don't know who that is, but they'll tell me. Brimelow, founder of the anti-immigrant website VDare.com, is a white nationalist and regularly publishes work by white supremacists, anti-Semites, and others on the radical right, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center. You know who they are, and they've usually checked their work pretty carefully. So anyway, just thought I would figure out which conference it was and see if it rang a bell. I feel like I've read it and it's been mentioned. We certainly haven't focused a great deal on it. All right. Jumping back to the TNR article that I was reading about Beattie and his connections here. We've got what? Where did we leave along the first? Okay, right. The mention of the White Nationalist Conference. Competent white men must be in charge if you want things to work. Beattie wrote on X in October. This is a Duke University lecturer, huh? Unfortunately, our entire national ideology is predicated on coddling the feelings of women and minorities and demoralizing competent white men. On January 6th, 2021, interesting date, he spent the day on X warning Senator Tim Scott, BLM, Ibram X. Kendi, and K. Cole James to, quote, learn their places and take a knee to MAGA. Tim Scott. Well, I'll be darned. That, on top of his personal in at the Kremlin, is highly questionable behavior for a ranking official, which has been overly normalized by this administration. Okay, so now we got the scoop on that story. I just thought that was, of some particular interest. And let's see. I wanted to also throw in there a Guardian piece about the closing of the FIMI hub. Trump administration shutters U.S. office countering foreign disinformation. It is from April 16th. Joseph Gideon in The Guardian. State Department's r/FIMI hub closed after right-wing critics alleged it censored conservative American speech. So I think making pretty much the same allegations. I'll throw in here the commentary from Marco Rubio, who said on the announcement, over the last decade, Americans have been slandered, fired, charged, and even jailed for simply voicing their opinions. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, posted on X on Wednesday, back in April. That ends today and is replaced with, I guess, probably slandering, firing, charging, and even jailing people simply voicing the opposite opinions. Progress. All right. Well, I don't think anything else really needs to be necessarily pulled out of this. We've certainly heard a great deal about what's going on, even if we miss some details that are only exclusively included in the Guardian piece here. But I wanted to follow this up with something that may or may not be related, but because there was some mention of CISA, I don't know how they say it, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, in one of the previous pieces, I wanted to add this piece just because, stream of consciousness, even if there's no connection. This is from May 14th. It is in cyberscoop.com. DHS, Department of Homeland Security, won't tell Congress how many people it's cut from CISA. Representative Benny Thompson, Democrat of Mississippi, of course, leveled that charge at DHS Secretary Kristi Noem at a hearing back in mid-May, where I am sure she performed admirably. We were probably laughing about it, but we missed this tidbit, I think, at the time. May have squeezed it in one day just before exiting for the day. The Department of Homeland Security won't tell Congress how many employees at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency it has fired or pushed to leave, a top congressional Democrat said on Wednesday. And why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you want to claim credit for it, right? You've overseen mass reductions in the workforce at CISA and the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Benny Thompson, the top Dem on the House Homeland Security Committee, told DHS Secretary Kristi Noem at the hearing, despite repeated requests from this committee on how many people have been fired or have been bullied into quitting, DHS has refused to share that information. It should worry every American that we do not know how many people are left at FEMA to respond to disasters and how many cyber defenders still work at CISA as China and other adversaries attack our systems every day. He continued. Thompson made his remarks at the close of the hearing, meaning Noem didn't have a chance to reply, not that it would have done her any good. In response, that's probably the best arrangement possible. She doesn't reply. In response to a request for comment about Thompson's assertion, DHS Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin, didn't comment specifically on the Mississippi Democrats' claim, but said CISA under Noem is refocusing its mission, starting with election integrity and staffers who worked on those issues. And getting rid of them, I'm sure. The agency is undertaking an evaluation of how it has executed its election security mission with a particular focus on any work related to mis, dis, or mal information. And now we have a better sense of what they mean when they say things like that. While the agency conducts the assessment, personnel who worked on mis, dis, and mal information, as well as foreign influence operations, and and disinformation have been placed on administrative leave. So it does have something to do with it. Thompson also said there's no plans for CISA and criticized Noem for falsely accusing CISA of censorship, and as the Trump administration uses the latter contention as a major justification for a proposed $491 million cut to the agency for fiscal year 2026. Now we're all paying the price for you buying into a baseless conspiracy theory, he said, and now we know which one it was. Past and future cuts at CISA have been a source of bipartisan worry on the Hill. Representative Andrew Garbarino, the New York Republican who chairs the panel's cybersecurity subcommittee, raised his own concerns again Wednesday. Garbarino brought up his own letter in February seeking information about CISA staff firings and their titles. He said he had not received a reply. He asked Noem for a commitment that she would answer it, quote, sometime soon, to which Noem replied, absolutely. Garbarino said he was concerned that reducing CISA's staff will not help CISA accomplish the mission of protecting cybersecurity. That's a great concern there, Mr. Garbarino. Wow. Well stated. In cyber issues unrelated to personnel reductions, Garbarino asked Noem about whether she would support a process of reopening industry consultation rather than restarting the writing of regulations under a law to require critical infrastructure owners to report major cyber incidents. Republicans in industry have said that pending regulations are overly burdensome. Yes, we would support that, sir. Don't tell anybody, I'm sure. Noem answered, more input from the private sector is important to make sure we're doing appropriate action. Okay. And Chairman Mark Green of Tennessee called for a floor vote for his legislation to address the cyber workforce gap. Oh boy. Madam Secretary, I look forward to working with you on finding creative solutions to our cyber workforce shortage, of which we don't know how big it is because you won't tell us, as well as ensuring that the agencies under DHS tasked with defending our cyber borders, I'm going to turn it into a border thing, primarily CISA, remain focused on that task, he said. How do you like that? Okay. Just a little peripheral view of the infighting from a slightly different angle. And that takes care of another piece that's been intriguing me, but never really found the time to make it on the air with it. And now we've accomplished it, and check it off the list. ICE raids, of course, are very much on everyone's mind these days. Here is a story that I've been holding on to since early April. Once again, just sort of trying to clear out some of the pocket, but I can't even get that far back because I keep running into so many things I wanted to share with you. This from Migrant Insider, which, I don't know, is it Substack? I can never tell whether things are Substack or not, but certainly Substack style report, Migrant Insider. And just to bring you this relatively short story, it's all happening pretty much exactly the way everybody thought it would be happening, except, of course, for all the people who voted for Trump who say, no, this isn't the way it was supposed to happen. This, though, ICE raids Idaho lawmaker's farm. But what kind of Idaho lawmaker? State Representative Stephanie Mickelson, and these are Idaho lawmakers, so they're not going to be like super liberal Democrats, and probably not even a Democrat at all. As I recall, it may even have been a Republican, but is it the right kind? ICE raids Idaho lawmaker's farm. State Representative Stephanie Mickelson was reported to ICE for speaking out against Trump's immigration policies. That's how she got herself raided. I'm going to guess that the pronunciation of ALE is not ale, but Ali, maybe. Ali Franqueza is the name of the reporter here, or the writer, anyway. An Idaho Republican state representative has accused her own party of weaponizing federal immigration authorities against her after she publicly criticized former President Donald Trump's immigration policies. Former president? That's interesting. Okay. Fine. This is dated April of 2025. Maybe the writer's just in the habit of saying former president. Donald Trump's immigration policies, according to Ace reporting from Investigate West. Is it another Substack? I don't know, but the link is there. State Representative Stephanie Mickelson, a seventh-generation Idahoan and farmer, said her family's farm was raided by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, just 3 days after a local Republican official falsely reported her to the agency. The incident, which unfolded in late January of 2025, has sparked outrage among some residents and raised concerns about political intimidation in the state. This happened late January, which means either around inauguration time or just after, I would guess. Mickelson, who represents a district in eastern Idaho, had spoken out against Trump's hardline stance on immigration, noting, and here it's not that she's, anti-immigration crackdown, but she's being realistic, noting the critical role that immigrant labor plays in the state's agricultural industry. I mean, these are all the things that people thought were going to be immune, but apparently she thought it was unfair that she was going to be immune, and she actually said so, and guess what? It got her targeted. Don't try to be helpful or fair. I guess that's the lesson. This is awful. Okay, so she speaks out against the hardline stance, noting the critical role that immigrant labor plays in the state's agriculture industry. If you think that you haven't been touched by an illegal immigrant's hands in some way along the production chain, you are kidding yourself, she said in a local news report posted to X. Uh-oh, that's the problem. Her comments drew the ire of Ryan Spoon, vice chair of the Ada County Republican Party, who publicly called for ICE raids on Mickelson's farm, accusing her of employing undocumented workers. On January 21st, the day after Trump's second inauguration, Spoon posted on X, "Could you please send some illegal immigration raids to the business owned by Idaho State Rep Stephanie Mickelson? She has been bragging about how many illegals her businesses employ." That would be a wild distortion of what she said. But if you take a look at the guy, you'll see why he does it. Spoon followed through by reporting Mickelson Farms to, like the actual business, Mickelson Farms, to ICE's tip line and website, according to a report by Newsweek on April 1st. By January 27th, 1 week into Trump's second term, the Idaho Statesman reported that an employee at Mickelson Farms was arrested by ICE. She described the ordeal as an attack on her livelihood by a recent transplant from San Francisco, who, she said, misunderstood Idaho's agricultural values. The raid has had a chilling effect on Mickelson's willingness to speak out. The next debate, I remained silent. I didn't speak up because I didn't want to put a target on my family's back, she said in a local news report, admitting that the intimidation had altered her behavior. I did change the way I did things. The incident has drawn comparisons to authoritarian tactics, you think, with some ex-users calling it Gestapo tactics and likening the political climate in Idaho, for God's sake, to Trump's America, exactly like Putin. Investigative journalist Daniel Walters first broke the story for Investigate West, highlighting how some right-wing activists in Idaho have turned ICE tip lines into a weapon against political rivals. That's what you need to be looking out for. The report noted that the Trump administration's push for tips on migrants has emboldened such actions, particularly in a state with a history of far-right extremism, including the presence of the Aryan Nations, a neo-Nazi group that operated a compound in northern Idaho until 2001. Idaho's economy heavily relies on immigrant labor, with a University of Idaho report estimating that 35,000 undocumented immigrants contribute tens of millions of dollars to sectors like agriculture, hospitality, and construction. Mickelson's case underscores the tension between the state's economic realities and the hardline immigration policies championed by Trump and his supporters. My guess is that maybe Spoon isn't a farmer, but, Idaho Republican county chair anyway. Okay. The incident has also fueled calls for greater oversight of ICE's operations. The American Civil Liberties Union has long criticized ICE for practices that risk violating constitutional protections, including the Fourth Amendment's safeguard against unreasonable searches and seizures, as well as guarantees of due process and equal protection. Neither ICE nor the Ada County Republican Party immediately responded to requests for comment. Mickelson has not indicated whether she plans to take legal action, but her experience has sparked a broader conversation about the intersection of politics and immigration enforcement in Idaho. Some residents and advocates are urging mainstream media outlets, including CNN and MSNBC, to cover the story, while others have called on Idaho Governor Brad Little to address the issue. However, With the state government dominated by ultra-conservative Republicans, critics say meaningful action may be unlikely. So that wraps that story up. It was pretty short and sweet. It's just, I don't know if there's anybody to feel any sympathy for in any of this, but I got, what little I know about Mickelson here, at least she was telling it like it is, which is exactly why her fellow Republicans hate her so very much.
From netrootsradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
That will do it for our Tuesday Kagro in the Morning pre-recorded show. Forgot to check in yesterday and make sure that we still had a country, but it's pre-recorded, so you couldn't answer me anyway. Well, stay tuned next for Justice Putnam and the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy on what I hope is still Netroots Radio.